Bossing has always been one of my favorite ways to make currency in Path of Exile, but there's always been this one kind of glaring issue that has prevented me from essentially just no-lifing bossing to make all of my currency, and that is of course the trade website, or even worse, third-party channels to be buying in bulk. This issue just puts simply way too much friction in the process of buying all of the invitations or fragments or whatever that you need to be able to do the boss, and actually just going and fighting the bosses. Sure, you could go to, some random Discord and buy 100 of the same one for an infinite amount of money, but the process of even finding that person, doing all of these things, it just felt off. And thankfully, this league, I have finally gotten the answer to my prayers. Christ Wilson has blessed us with the currency exchange. And with this, bossing has become my new go-to strat for making money. Now, there's a few things that I want to cover particularly about bossing in this video. Starting out, it's identifying a boss that you want to farm. Like, how do you actually tell if a boss is currently profitable on average? Second is how to actually run that boss. And third, how do you sell the items? Because interestingly enough, the details of specific items actually matter quite a bit when it comes to making consistent money from bosses. A lot of the time, the price of the invitations has these items factored in. So knowing whether or not a roll is good or not on an item, or some specific ways that you can re-roll the rolls on certain items, will help a ton in making a boss more profitable. If this video ends up helping you out, make sure to give it a like, and if you enjoy this style of content, make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel so that you can stay up to date with all of my latest videos, and without further ado, let's get into it. So the first step when you want to start bossing is choosing a build, because if you try to go with whatever build you have currently, there's a pretty good chance that it's a farming build, a map clearing build, or some kind of typical build, and not really a bossing build. Bossing builds typically come in two flavors, either one where you can just mostly ignore all of the mechanics, maybe have to deal with like some slams and stuff here or there, but you are able to just face tank everything, do enough damage to be able to get the boss down in a reasonable amount of time, and kind of just relax. The other form is a 0 HP build or a ZHP build that just tries to kill the boss as quickly as possible. Now, personally, I prefer tanky builds because they can do a wider variety of bosses and they're able to do some other content as well. An example build would be the Firestorm Blood Magic Inquisitor build that I released about a week ago. But the idea is that these tanky builds require significantly less skill and significantly less like brain input when you're playing it. You can kind of just relax, hold right click on the boss and not worry about anything else except maybe a slam here and there. Now there are some downsides to this type of archetype as well. The major one is going to be just that you're not going to be making as much currency with this build because a ZHP build is literally just like one tapping the boss, getting the loot, and getting out. And on top of that, a full, well put together tanky build that can do damage. It's probably going to be a little bit more expensive than just a build that uses like 10 uniques and doesn't worry about anything but damage. If you're interested in a tanky bossing build, I did release the Firestorm Blood Magic Inquisitor about a week ago. You can check it out, it's linked here in the notes. Now, the other option is going to be a 0 HP build that is essentially designed to one-shot stuff. As I said before, these builds typically are going to be giving you the most currency per hour. They're going to be a little bit cheaper, but they're not going to be able to do as wide of a variety as content. They're also going to take a little bit more skill, especially if you want to do bosses that you can't just instantly kill before they can move. Now, the most common example of this build is going to be a ZHP Ice Trap build. This is relatively common. I've linked here to PoE Ninja that just has all of the people running this build. If you look over at the left here, I mean, it's like 90% plus on most of the main items here. They're all kind of running the same setup. I mean, this just makes sense to run it this way. And if you want a video that kind of shows you a little bit about how this build looks, I've linked a video from Jungra in here playing the exact build. You pre-throw a bunch of traps, you run up, wait for the boss to pop them, and they pretty much instantly die. So this kind of build is good, but it might run into issues if you want to do anything besides like Eater or Exarch or things like that. I have personally played both of these kinds of archetypes multiple times, and in my opinion, it is significantly more fun to just be able to relax while you're doing it instead of having to just 100% full concentration on what you're doing. Like, I want to be able to listen to something or maybe watch another video occasionally in the downtime, because a lot of these bosses like to blab and yap for like 10 minutes straight. It's nice to kind of just be able to zone out a little bit. Next thing we're going to talk about is actually choosing the boss that you want to farm. Now, the very basics of choosing the boss is how much does it cost to actually buy the fragments for the boss, and how much money are you going to get from buying those fragments. So I heavily suggest with everything that you do with bossing, just use the exchange. It is so much nicer. This is the main reason I'm even making this video, is because you can go in here, you can type the exact fragment that you want, you can choose what you want to pay for it and buy essentially as many as you like. There's no going to the trade website. There's no going to third-party discords, trying to find somebody to buy in bulk, messaging 100 people and not getting them to respond. You click the button, you get the item. This is the reason that you do bossing now. You're going to go in here. You're going to see what the average price is. Like for right now, it seems like the average price is around 22 to 24 chaos per awakening fragment. I'll talk about obtaining the fragments a little bit more in depth in a little bit, but let's go ahead and say that it's about 100, 115 chaos to be able to run this boss. So then what you're going to go do is you're going to go look at the drops that that boss actually has. Like for Uber Serious, it's going to be Massive Thread of Hope, Tempest Rising, Aureus End, and the Savior, as well as these additional items. You will see if on average you make more money than what you're putting in. And for particularly Cirrus, literally just the Awakener Orb drop chance with the cost of Awakener's Orb, which we can check right here if you'd like to. We'll go ahead and do I want Awakener's Orb for divines, 5.25 divines for one Awakener Orb. So if we then look what a divine is worth, it's about 152, 153 right now, and it's costing you roughly 115 chaos or so each time that you want to run this boss. You can see that with just the cost of Awakener's Orbs, you are going to be making money off of that item alone. However, you do need to keep in mind that that is a per map currency that you're making. It is not a currency per hour, and in currency per hour also matters a lot here. So if you're making a good amount of money per map, meaning that Awakener's Orbs are paying for the map entrance fees by themselves, meaning anything extra here is just a bonus, you can then start thinking about, okay, so how much can I realistically make on average per map, and how many maps can I run per hour? With Cirrus, there's a lot of downtime. He's got a bunch of in-between phases. There's a bunch of RP that he likes to yap and blab for like 10 minutes at the start. So although you can make a ton of money here doing Cirrus, the chances of you making a good amount of currency per hour are a lot lower because of how long it takes to go through all this RP and everything. Now, this can be more or less depending on how good you are at the fight, how often you die, how quickly your build can kill it. You got to try to take all of these things into account, right? If your build can 100% AFK Cirrus, you want to watch a movie or a TV show or something on your other monitor and you don't care that there's a lot of downtime, maybe that's even better for you. Cirrus might be great because then you don't need to think that much. However, if you're just focused on like raw currency per hour, maybe Cirrus isn't the ideal choice for you. Next thing is, let's talk about how we actually obtain these fragments. By far, the way that you want to do this is through the exchange. So we'll say that we want awakening fragments and say that we want them for chaos. The thing that I personally feel you should take into account here is that you want to have enough fragments to be able to run the boss. That's important. So, you would buy 5 of these at 100 chaos, right? You'd buy those 5. However, on average, you can also do something where you say maybe you want to buy 20 fragments, right? For 400 chaos, that's the same ratio. Put in a long-term order for like, say 385 or maybe even 375, right? Something that's a little bit cheaper. We could probably even go down to 18 or 17 maybe, so 360. So say if we did 360, we would put this long-term order in, right? And you'd just let this sit for a while. You could maybe even put in a few of these, because occasionally there are going to be people who underprice their fragments just trying to sell them fast, or they just misprice them or something. Like, look, it's already filling here, right? So I'm at a 1 to 18 ratio, and this is already filling, like even as we're speaking here, right? You could probably even go lower than that. So that's the idea, is there's going to be people who are underpricing their fragments, just trying to sell them instantly, or maybe just like mispricing them or something. You can take advantage of that and make some extra, like profit margins in there by doing something like this. However, there is one issue with obtaining fragments, and that is that obtaining items on the exchange requires gold. So there are only a few ways to realistically overcome this. If you really only want to do bossing, the Cortex zone can give you some amount of gold. If you're doing feared, you can actually self-sustain the amount of gold currently. I do think that they will change this in the future as they adjust the currency rate and stuff for the exchange. However, for right now, you may need to swap over to another character every so often and just either run like a couple juice tier 17s or speed run through some tier 16s for a little bit just to get get enough gold to run another 5 or 6 hours of bossing. Once you figured out the build that you're going to play, once you figure out the boss that you're going to farm, you need to figure out how to sell the loot properly. What I'm going to say is that anything that you can sell on the exchange, meaning like currency or things like that, just sell on the exchange. You can try to upsell it a little bit, basically doing the opposite of what I said in the last step. But for me, I pretty much just always sell at market price and don't worry too much about it because I'm trying to keep enough liquid funds to be able to keep doing whatever it is that I'm doing. However, when it comes to anything else, all of these other items, the rolls on these items matter a lot, and that's what we're going to talk about here. Uber Cirrus is a perfect example because there's a lot of stuff on this boss that has rolls that matter a ton. So we'll go with this Thread of Hope first. So let's go ahead and type Thread of Hope here. So I'm going to particularly do Not Corrupted just to make this exercise a little bit easier here. So we can see a Thread of Hope here, massive ring, -18, 15 chaos, 15 chaos, 20 chaos, 20 chaos. That's the baseline, the floor price. If we go ahead and use this little icon here, it'll let us search by the modifiers on the item. So I'll show you that if we do a maximum of -15, we can go ahead and see it's 20 chaos for something that is like -15, -14. However, if we take this number and we bump this up to being almost perfect, you'll notice it's worth 50 chaos, 60 chaos. And if we go one step further and go ahead and do completely perfect, it goes up to about 1.5 divine for an actually perfect one. Now, this is a 55% drop chance from this boss. If you are farming this boss long term, that means that over half of the items you get from this boss is going to be this Thread of Hope. 1 out of 10 of those items is going to be a perfect one. However, we can take this one step further. So if you got a bunch of really bad Thread of Hopes, I don't have any more than just the one that I've got here at the moment, but if you say you had like 10 or 11 or 12 of these that were really bad, you take all the bad ones, you put them in the vendor, and you'll notice that you get this hidden item. A random unique item is what it says. Now, you'll see that these say 7, 7, and 10, right? Like those are the 3 numbers that are here. And then we'll go ahead and accept. And this new one that we get is 7. It gives us a random number. So you can take all of your bad Thread of Hopes, which aren't going to sell. They're not really worth anything. 15, 20 chaos at most. You can vendor 3 of them at a time, re-roll it, and get another shot at that -10% Thread of Hope. Now, another example that we can use is this Crown of the Inward Eye. So say the boss that you decided to farm was Normal Cirrus, and we're going to go ahead back to this tab, and we're going to type Crown of the Inward Eye. So we'll go ahead and do the same thing as before. We're going to do Corrupted, no, and we'll see how much this costs. So on average, this is worth essentially nothing. So we will search for this, and we'll do perfect ones, right? So minimum 21 roll here. 40 chaos for an absolute perfect one. Now, you're probably not going to get that many perfect ones because this is a pretty rare roll, right? 12 possible rolls, and the chance of this dropping is 38%, so it's not as common as this massive Thread of Hope. However, there's one other thing that we need to look at here. Sometimes on Uber bosses and bosses in general, there are corrupted implicits that can be worth a ton. So if we do implicit power charge, for example, and we go ahead and we search for this, you'll notice that at the very minimum, these are 7 divine. Now, this is a very rare outcome. However, there are other implicits that are worth something as well. So the idea is that decide for yourself, like, is this item worth anything in a base state? No. And if so, just toss them in a big tab and then just corrupt all of them in a row and maybe you'll get some good outcomes. This is on average not going to give you a huge return very often, but wouldn't you rather have 7 divine than just have nothing after you farmed a boss 100 times? I think that makes sense to me, right? It may be a small difference in profit, but it's still a difference. And lastly, on the topic of implicits, there's one more situation here. If you are going to be farming something like the Feared or something like Uber Cortex, some of these items will have random synthesized implicits. These implicits can be almost anything, meaning that there is a very large chance that they're probably going to be bad, but a small chance that they might be insanely good. So for example, this Mask of the Tribunal, if you get something like an aura modifier, it can be worth a ton. So if we come back here to Mask of the Tribunal, you'll see that in general, these are not really worth that much, right? However, if we go ahead and go into show filters and we do something like implicit, I don't know, aura effect, and we look for increased effective non-curse auras, you'll see that it's worth a divine, 2 divine, 2 divine starting out for increased effective non-curse auras from your skills. There's lots of random ones like this, that a particular item with a particular implicit might be worth an insane amount of money. In game, you can always use something like Awaken PoE Trade. You'll notice I have this like 1 divine tab here. You can check to see if the implicits that are on an item, like say this synthesized implicit, is this worth something? Maybe, and then you can kind of, modify it down to just the specific things you're trying to sell it for. This is another thing that I do suggest that you do. If you find a bunch of good ones and you don't really know that they'll sell for something, toss them in a 1 divine tab. I've made, just from random stuff that I didn't ever expect to sell, probably 20 or 30 divine in just random sales to people. It's a pretty decent thing to do. And lastly, in the notes that are going to be linked down below, I have put information on basically every single boss, strategies that you can use to go faster through these bosses, or maybe some very specific things that could cause you problems. I talk about the worthwhile loot on both the normal version and the Uber version, additional drops, my overall thoughts about it, and this goes for basically every single boss that you could imaginably farm that I felt like would be worthwhile. There are a couple smaller bosses that I haven't put in here, like the smaller invitation bosses and things like that. You could farm those if you want to, but they always end up being more so mapping styles and not really just pure bossers. I put most of the things that I would consider a pure bossing strategy in here. And that's going to be it for the video. As always, the notes are down in the description with everything that you could ever need. And remember, boys, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to give this video a like, subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit that notification bell to stay up to date with all the latest videos, and stay safe out there in Ray Class. And I'll see you guys in the next video.